Hi, Kana. How are you?
Aloha, Johnson.
Aloha.
Such an honor. So grateful.
So, so great to see you here. And we are live on Facebook. And I'm really happy to have you here on this edition of Truth, Wisdom, and Freedom Conversations, our little virtual tea time that we started a couple of weeks ago. And really, these conversations are for us to tune in, tap into what these big macro principles of truth, of freedom, of wisdom are, and what they mean in this day and age. And I just wanted to introduce Kana for those of you who don't know who she is. She is the founder of the Global Impact Group. And we've been having some conversations since I met her maybe a couple of weeks ago about resilience, about the inner ecosystem, and how taking care of the inner ecosystem really is going to create an outward reflection of what our external ecosystem is going to look like. We talked a lot about art and systemic change and sustainability and how that looks like on a personal level and also on a global level. And Kana really works with impacting change from the inside and the out, and the outside and the in, through regenerative projects, and creating structures and investment programs and protocols and things in place so that we can live more sustainably. That doesn't just mean eco, but also within here in the heart. And we thought that we would get together and talk a little bit about conscious dying, because that seemed to be a common thread that was coming up, and that's what we were feeling into. And that's a very scary thing to talk about, because currently, right now, we're faced with a global pandemic that is a virus that is causing death, and our economy is slowly dying. Our sense of identity as a people is dying. A lot of things are shedding, right? Like a snake shedding its skin. And we thought to talk about the courage to consciously let go, let that old identity pass so that something new can be reborn. Right? We oftentimes talk a lot about, oh, I want to be something but this. I want to go somewhere. I want to achieve something, right? We all want something, right? That's part of the picture of destiny. We all came here on this planet with a purpose. But of course, the hurdle is we have to go into a place of letting go of the muck, right? The gunk. And that's the hard part. We have to consciously choose to die. So here we are, Kana.
Here we are, Johnson. What an honor. What an honor to be invited into your truth, wisdom, freedom ecosystem that you've been cultivating likely for years internally. And now it's birthing in this form in the last few weeks. It's such a delight and such a blessing to meet you and to be part of this co-journeying together. And so, wow, I feel like I'd love to invite you to synopsify the rest of everything else that I do. It's so succinct and powerful. So appreciate you and the custodianship that you're holding space for, both in my life and also so many that you're rippling for. So, wow, so much, Dion, so much, right? Do we start from the center of the center or the macro of the macro?
Well, let's talk a little bit about what you're doing as a conscious leader in your community. So for those who are not in Australia, tell us first where you're located in Australia.
Yes, that's such a great placing point of geolocation. So I'm so grateful to be living on the land in a region called Northern Rivers, which is in between New South Wales and Queensland, two of the largest states in Australia. And the particular region that I'm in the Northern Rivers region, Byron Bay region, is very much known for being on the frontier of consciousness, of activism, sustainability, and a number of the visionaries that I've noticed from more main-centered, world city type ecosystems like Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, and so forth. Once they've attained a certain scope of growth in their mission or their initiative, they then gravitate to a region like this, partly because of what's been honed and dedicated over the years in regards to activism and being on the frontier, and also the magnificence of the nature that is here, that can hold a number of us visionaries, the ones who are on the frontier, on the front line, being emissaries on multiple areas of social impact and systemic change, both internally and externally. So I'm beaming from here to you in my beautiful home city, Sydney, which I'm grateful for as well, and to wherever our fellow guests are beaming in from the world. So it's a pivotal region because it's ripe for experimentation for the new world of what's to come, this new old wisdom world. Hence why a number of us are here and would open this invitation to any of you who feel called to. It's a
show us around. You were telling me a little bit about the Regenerative Living Hub that
yes.
You were creating. This is a creative space that you're currently in, where people gather together to create, to co-create, right?
Well, part of perfect segue. Regen Living Hubs is one of our core projects within Global Impact Group, because we feel so passionate about regeneration being part of the future. So this is beyond sustainability. It's co-creating systems, internal ecosystems and external ecosystems on all levels, for it to be every element of our life design and co-creation to be regenerative, to be self-regenerative, but also coalescing in each other's dance, and what it means to be human during this time, and what it means to be an emissary or a frontier leader. I call it servant leadership. This is what I've consciously died to go deeper within, and to decipher and distill what leadership truly means to me, and courage, as you were sharing. So, you're the first concept or the pillar of your values and virtues, truth. That's the core compass point for how I lead my life. And so it really reminds me of my favorite quote, veritas vos liberabit, which means, the truth shall set us free. And so within that is a core value of Global Impact Group and also Regen Living Hub. And so the whole prayer and commitment vision within Regen Living Hub is not just one location. It's really creating the model for regenerative living hubs, whether they be in the urban setting or regional setting, or global macro type regenerative living hub. It's all here for us in terms of nebulous co-creation. So it's there's lots of land here that is calling for regeneration on a soil level, and equally on a cultural level, and a spiritual, philosophical, social, energetic value exchange level.
We can go in so many different directions here. And I love what you were talking about with social enterprise and living off the land and communing with the land, not only on a physical level, but also on an energetic, mental, emotional, deep, inward level. And to me, in the work that I do, I mainly focus on people. I don't have so much experience of living and cultivating sustainability, living off the land. And I love that you're putting all of these different pieces together. And you were talking about how you guys are meeting the UN 17 sustainability goals, and that a lot of the work that you're doing is about multi-generational impact. And I love that, these collective solutions that you guys are fostering and planting and cultivating these seeds. So what are you seeing right now around your communities in the area that you are in terms of, I have been actually in my circles hearing about people, going like, oh, we're going to go and live on the land now because this city life doesn't work for me anymore because we've been put on a big pause, and people are feeling called to return to nature. So where do you see our modern fast-paced culture moving towards? Is the coronavirus a catalyst to lead us into these more sustainable eco communities?
Absolutely. It's been such a seismic catalyst, and a number of us, likely you'd relate, Johnson, a number of us who've been facilitators and custodians of the more inner spiritual world, we've been preparing for this for years and decades. So to a number of us, we're not surprised by it. Perhaps we're confronted by it again and reminded by the reality of it. But to a number of us, we're not surprised, which is why a number of us have been on land. And I wish to honor as well, so many of us are doing the good work in the urban area. So So I also wish to invite this palette of perspective, and it comes with the consciously dying element of dying with like dissolving our layers of identity, dissolving our layers of what we think something is, this perception. It's having the courage to truly look within, and this is what Corona also has gifted a number of us who don't regularly meditate. I know that's not me and you and people in our circles, but perhaps a large number of the world didn't meditate and do self-work and self-practice as much. So it's such a core opportunity. Corona has gifted and also proclaimed its potency of actually lovingly, you don't actually have a choice as much right now.
And we're almost forced into it. And I love what you talked about with conscious dying. For me, I've had several conscious deaths. I mean, my most recent conscious death was letting go of this successful holistic studio that I founded in Singapore. I was there for 6 years and I let it go because my partner got a job transfer here and it didn't feel like we were going to stay in Singapore, where things are a bit cushy. Things are served to you on a silver platter. Life is easier there. Taxes are low. You have a lot of stability. It's a bit like a bubble and you don't really have to work so hard. I mean, you have to work, but you don't have a lot of the issues that the rest of the world faces with danger, right? That's one of the big things, is that there's so much safety within this island, right? And so I chose to leave that and come back to what the majority of the world is living with, which is a sense of uncertainty and unknowing. And not to say that doesn't exist in Singapore, but in varying degrees, it's less, right? And so I gave that up to explore something new, to go on a new journey, a new path, and before that, I was an actor. I was in theater, and that was what I thought. I went to school to study to be a classical theater performer, to be an actor, right? And that is not how my life ended up being at all. I of course, as I was performing and after graduating from conservatory, I was dabbling in the healing arts and exploring my spiritual path, because a lot of the work that was being asked of me through theater was asking me to look at my own psyche, to look at my own behavior patterns, because I was exploring these other characters. Some of them were psychopaths, some of them were really joyful and comedic, right? And so there was this whole range. So I was asked to access myself in a bigger range. And while that was happening, all these patterns that I didn't know I had started to come into the forefront. And when I could see that, I was faced with two choices. One was to essentially, do I just ignore that for the duration of this performance and then, move on?
Like mentalize?
Or do I confront the shadows that are coming up? I remember I was doing this show in Cincinnati, Ohio, and those of you who are familiar with the States, Ohio is not the most exciting place. And I was playing this psychopathic savant who was, he plays Bach, and he went to go stalk his old piano teacher from childhood to torment her. Not the happiest of times. And after these shows, I would feel really depressed because I was feeling into this character's pain, but then of course this character's pain also lives in me. So then that brought to mind, well, if I'm feeling something that is written on paper from a script and I'm embodying that as a physical flesh on stage, then what is the rest of the world doing when there are all these stories and mythologies and fables? Remember Aesop's fables when we were growing up as children, where we learn all of these secret codes, these lessons that are embedded through teachers, through parents, and they tell us these things, like all the Greek myths with their themes of betrayal and jealousy and tit for tat, and let's fight the good fight, right? The tortoise and the hare, right? We value that which is modest, which is the tortoise, but then we demonize the hare, who's actually a go-getter and like really excited about going forward. So then we start to separate ourselves. There's a divisiveness within. You look at the mythologies of the prince and the damsel in distress, the woman always being saved, the prince slaying the dragon, and the dragon's a symbol. And that dragon is a symbol of the sacred earth, the mythical, the mysterious, that which is invisible more intangible but more felt. And all these myths of knights slaying these dragons, right? So we have a lot of this in our culture, in Hollywood movies and stories and these myths. And so then I was thinking, well, if I'm feeling this just from connecting to a character on a piece of paper, and then bringing it to life on stage, and then everyone else is walking around with these stories that have been told to them since they were 0 through however old, till
from conception. Yeah.
Right, from conception. Right? Now we're just this walking bag of just baggage of stuff that we may not have elected to, that may not be the story you want to tell. And that plays a really big part in trying to live sustainably, because how can we live sustainably if we haven't addressed all of these dark parts of ourselves? If we keep looking at life as, we fell out of grace with God, Adam and Eve, the woman, it's the woman's fault, right? If these, and I didn't grow up Christian, right? But I grew up in a Western culture, and that seed very much was planted in my surroundings, right? So we have to go through this conscious dying, as you talked about. We have to let go and shed these stories. So my next question is, what did that look like for you, your conscious dying?
Oh, I love it. My next question. I love it. And I so appreciated your sharing, Johnson. I mean, I didn't, of course, have that unique palette. And yet I come from an arts background as well. So sacred dance, sacred movement, and in particular, consciously choosing Polynesian cultural dance when I was in my early 20s, rather than going down the route of hip hop and salsa, which I could have totally. And thankfully, on an energetic level or an intuitive level, I really pertain it and honor my Chinese cultural background for this as well. This sense of honor, the sense of respect, that everything that I do on some level comes back to my family's honor or my culture's honor, right? So that was. And this comes to the death element, right? So in my early 20s, I had to choose between like my mythos of, okay, this immigrant Chinese woman, young lady in growing up in one of the most oldest indigenous cultural lands and cultures of this world, meaning Aboriginal indigenous. And then I would go and consciously choose, well, somewhat consciously, as conscious as I could. I'm more conscious about it now, looking back, to be part of Polynesian dance theatre company and to learn other cultures and other mythos and to somewhat represent it more than other Polynesian young people could. And so that was confronting in itself, and that was a death and a life moment of choosing my mythos, my sovereignty of this feels most right to me, it feels most authentic. I don't have any role models, external or custodians or elders, to guide me, because we're all co-creating this new mythos as we go, which is why it's so challenging. I feel like this is new ground constantly because it's unprecedented. And so that was, I feel like, a core element of one of my first deaths. And then, finding, co-creating and founding my first company that produced the first TedX in Australia at 25. I was like this young go-getter, like networker, and like boom, boom, pow office. Like had my own office on the 35th floor, and like that was like raw. That was like, that was like the go-getter. Sort of more Asian as well and more high achiever, and thank goodness. I mean, perhaps I throttled it so deeply and so like much, and all the areas of my life as much as I could, that I had no choice but to choose my own midlife crisis. Like I felt like I was intuiting my quarter life crisis. I was like, okay, if I'm going to do this life thing, bring it all on. Like bring it, whether it be the crisis element or the success element. And so right after TED, everything in my life dissolved around me. My relationship at the time, my 2.5-year relationship after a 5-year relationship, the business, how it felt for me. Like I wanted to be on the precipice and the frontier of wisdom and innovation, as I still do now. Although since the deepest dying, as in the deepest dark night of the soul, Saturn return in some of our circles languages, it was the deepest gift that I could have gifted myself and my now world, my now community, and how I am as a woman, and how I show up as a being, as a custodian. And so within that was a core reasoning to that was my grandmother passing in Hong Kong, and knowing that my grandfather would be alone in Hong Kong in his nursing home. And he was quite a core part of my growing up, and the masculine, in a sense, like this role modeling of healthy masculine to a certain degree of care. And I knew that I had to drop everything in my life in Australia to go and also honor my culture and live as an adult in my birth culture, and to reclaim that which perhaps was lost as well as an immigrant. And so that was deeply core to another level of death. And then so walking around in Hong Kong as a barefoot, like committed to one love and universal consciousness being, to give me all the spiritual depth that I could savor within and die within, and yet also I also produced TedX Hong Kong as well at the time. So, and then be on the front line of social activism and of the Occupy movement. So I was like this complete anomaly curveball from seemingly nowhere. And I knew that if I could be in full authenticity in a place like Hong Kong, my birth city, within all of those parameters, then I could do anything in this life. So that was the core death.
And that's beautiful, because as opportunity arises to us, it also feels like sometimes things are seemingly taken away from us at the same time. And there's this overlap. And as you were talking about crisis, the word crisis comes from the Greek word krisis, which means it's a turning point that goes into it's a turning point in a disease, and that change that indicates whether you recover or you die. So it's a crossroads, essentially. That's what the root word of crisis means. And there was an elder from North America the other week who was talking a lot about the state of emergency we're all in, and about the state of emergence. And I very much see us in relationship to that. We can either be in a state of emergency, an inner emergency, this virus that is outside of us, and it's also reflecting a deep virus that we're not looking at, or we haven't had time to look at, but now we do. We can either look at it as an emergency, or we can emerge from it. And that's very much this crisis point. People look at like, oh, the midlife crisis, the quarter life crisis. These are, in indigenous cultures, these were normally rites of passage. We would have a rite of passage to then evolve into the next level of human. But because we've been ignoring these natural rhythms within us, we call it a crisis. But it's not really a crisis, right? If we change our perspective, right? It's really, oh, I'm choosing to value this other aspect of me, which is going back to my birth city, going back to take care of an elderly loved one. Though that does not fall into the aspirations of this young go-getter woman, working her way up, producing TedX talks and doing all the social activism and social entrepreneurship for the greater good, right? So sometimes it could feel like we're not living our life's purpose. But I think that also goes back to the mythology that we carry within us, that is very much around doing. We have there's a story that we carry that is like, we need to excel. There is a ladder to climb. To get from point A to point B means we are successful. I don't know where that story came from. It might very well come from the old, pagan knight stories of King Arthur and the Round Table. And now that with globalization, the East and the West bleeding together, we don't know where stories come from, because there's so much cultural interchange, right, or exchange that happens, that we're absorbing so many different stories from different people. And I think one of the most damaging stories is this linear story in modern society, whether you're in Hong Kong, Singapore, or in North America or Europe, that we have something that we have to get. There's this holy grail that we need to get. And if we keep seeing it as something out there, all of this is just going to wither away, and it's just not going to work. It's not sustainable.
Absolutely. Yeah, because it's not attuned to nature's rhythms. Nature and the truth, freedom, and liberation of it all, it teaches me in continuum that death is a deep part of the process. Like it's important. It's the composting, the tree rotting away in order to give way to more space and to more the next generation of the lineage, in a sense, right? And so it's reclaiming our mythos and co-creating it as well. It's not reclaiming it in the sense of gurifying or pedestaling, gosh, for the want of a better word, putting on a pedestal a number of our sacred indigenous cultures, which I am a student of many of them I'm a student of, although it's so nuanced. It's so important to not put them on a pedestal and to reclaim our own sovereignty and our own co-creatorship and beautiful opportunity to co-create new mythology that's deeply authentic to the truth, wisdom, liberation of our current truth, which is pulsing in every present moment. And so for me, the nectar and the barometer of true death and rebirth is presence, and vice versa. So they both interchange and interconnect, and that's my own internal barometer of how deeply honoring and present am I to the most authentic cycle of the death-life process internally and within every element of my life. And that's a whole series, right? That's a whole wisdom school, mystery school, Jedi school type curriculum that I feel a number of us are custodians of.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about the death, because we're talking very conceptual and very macro here about the conscious dying. And let's talk a little bit about what that looks like, how that feels like in the body, what situations might arise, just to make it more practical for people who are watching. So what are some examples? I can think of a few. I can name a few, and then you name a few.
Okay, please go. Please.
So when a child realizes that the world isn't safe anymore, that's a death. That's a metaphorical death. From when a child enters puberty, that's a loss of innocence. That's a death. That may not be conscious. We can make it a conscious rite of passage, like in indigenous cultures. There's a honoring of that, right? In the Jewish tradition, there's a bar mitzvah or a bat mitzvah, right? So in cultures, there are rites of passage to honor those transitions, because this version of yourself dies so that you can now embody this new version of yourself. In some indigenous cultures, they don't celebrate birthdays. They only celebrate the day, when you become the more evolved, compassionate, loving, different version of yourself, the new version of yourself. They celebrate the rebirth, not the birthday, right? So these are all examples of death that can be conscious or unconscious.
Indeed, I love them each. And I mean, that's so beautifully eloquented in terms of the human life cycle, the purpose, the raison d'être, like why are we here, the purpose of us being born. We've chosen this life in this form, in this particular body, in this particular culture. And so following on from that, from the child, it's the young adult, right? From adolescent into young adult. And then so in a feminine perspective, from maiden to woman to mother. You don't have to be a mother of children as such, but the characteristics of being a mother, a loving custodian, carer of not just your own family, but of community at large. And what does that feel like? What are your relations? How are you relating? And then, of course, sort of the more elder and the crone. Those are mythos that we need to reclaim. And each of those junctures and nexus points, the crises, as you were sharing, right? It involves deep death and deep rebirth and deep celebration and honoring. I feel like that, I'd love to speak to that, in that's actually what's most missing in our collective world. So Not to say that the death isn't happening or the depression isn't happening or the convulsions in the body, like the uncontrollable shakes or the uncontrollable tears and the breakdowns to break through. On the other side, we don't have enough custodians or elders who are even aware of that process, let alone to be there fully ready to celebrate and honor the individual and the collective. So it's re-ceremonializing and then co-creating and creating the new sacred. What does that mean, right? So I know, I mean, on the masculine level, there's different, the archetypes are actually being co-created as well as we speak from a number of my brothers and men who focus on this in terms of this world, and it's so important to honor that sacred feminine, sacred masculine, both within and within each other. And then how do we come in and interunion and interconnect, which is then our environment as well. Coming back to the land, it is a complete mirror to how we can evolve. Yeah. How I, this is my own personal experience.
Yeah, what's coming up for me right now as you're talking is that one of the main archetypes that we haven't reconciled yet is the inner child and that aspect of child that is wounded. And for me, I see that a lot with clients that I work with. They could be in their 30s, 40s, 50s, it doesn't matter, but you are emotionally, energetically, mentally still in this place of trying to impress, trying to belong, trying to do more than is outside your natural comfort zone of your boundaries or what is healthy. And that is because there's something unresolved in dealing with the mother and the father, because the honoring of the loss of innocence was not acknowledged. And when we don't acknowledge the death of an older part of ourselves into the current part of ourselves now, then part of us is missing. And in the shamanic work that I do, we call this a soul loss, meaning that part of your soul, if you're into that languaging, or if you don't think of it that way, you can think of it as just the larger self, your whole self becomes fragmented. So then there's a part of you that shuts itself down. So then you're afraid of, let's say, sensuality, right? If you're holding on to an abuse story, like as I've seen sometimes with people, whether that's physical or verbal or sexual abuse, right? Or, if you are in this, especially in the Asian culture, since we're both Asian, we're brought up with this, which I really think comes from the Opium War, this collective thing of get, go, beat the white man, beat the colonialist. There's this thing that is unspoken, that is ingrained in a lot of Asian children, whether you are an immigrant or you live in Hong Kong or Singapore or China, that you need to strive to get something to be successful. You need to show something for your life. Something needs to be seen.
Intangible.
It has to be tangible, right? and if you think back to ancient Chinese culture, and it's so poetic. It's the honoring of the dragon, where the West slayed the dragon and doesn't resuscitate the dragon. In a lot of the Eastern traditions, the dragon is the embodiment of the sacred earth, the feminine principle, and that is very much treasured. So what the hell happened there, when we somehow have gotten, these stories in us to kill that inner feminine part of us, that part of us that feels, that part of us that values things outside of the linear, outside of the logical, the more magical, mysterious parts of ourselves. And like you said, we really have to reclaim that if we're going to be conscious leaders. So if you're a leader and you're thinking like, oh, I have to hit these targets and I have to make these people get this result, it's like, I don't know what that is. That's a robot to me. That's not conscious. That means you're all in your thinking mind, left brain. And it's like, where's your feeling sensuous side? If you're afraid to be silly and look, embarrass yourself in front of, your peers and be vulnerable, that to me is not conscious. That's why, I've had people telling me like, I created this character out of a wig. Oh, that's going to ruin your brand because you're playing a drag queen talking about spirituality. It's going to confuse people. I don't freaking care. Like, this is honestly where I'm coming from, because I'm trying to express the different aspects of myself. And if it appears as foolish, great, then so be it. Like, I'm really at this point in my life where I really don't care. Like, I know I've said this before in other, a few years ago, like, I don't care what other people think about me, but that was kind of conditioned, but now I really don't care, because now you can see me falling and being silly and very goofy. Like, it's a different aspect of me. And I think the more that we can be upfront that way, whether you work in a corporate or you're in government, right? Because as a leader, it's very important, and to be courageous in letting your people, the people who look up to you for advice, to let them know that you don't know, that you need help, or that like, can you help? You know what I mean? There's
Absolutely.
so.
I mean, authenticity is a key ingredient and core imperative for truth and courage, and vice versa. And it's really truly the healing and the nectar that we're all calling for. Like, it's I mean, it's beyond words, thankfully, right? I bow to, I'm in such awe of it, that when I'm in the presence of it as well, you know. And I feel like it's so important to celebrate that of each other, and that it's part of the cycle. We can't bypass it anymore. We can't shortcut it. We can't deny it no more. Can't hide it. It's thankfully as well, right? It's like,
we can go on and on and on about truth and authenticity, but I think we're going to have to come shortly to a close. But before we go, what are your top one thing or top three things for one who is looking to embark on like must-haves in terms of support system and things that they can do on a practical level to move closer to their authentic truth? Go.
Oh, potent. I feel like the core practice of mine is unabashed daily you time. Daily, like, send blessings to the world, send blessings and love to everything around you, but unabashedly, like, cordon off at least 3-4 hours is like it depends. I mean, you can work up to it. I feel 3-4 hours is the minimum during these times right now, to really, truly, deeply listen to what it is you're here for, what it is you want, where is your heart most breaking, and move towards that, and not be afraid of that, and surrender into it. I mean, it's another word to dive, surrender into it. So 3-4 hours, I feel like that's core medicine. That would be my medicine or recommendation.
And if that seems daunting, maybe start with 5 minutes or 10 minutes, and if you find that
stretch into this, you know, like I feel like it's the remembrance of our truth and the unabashed honoring of our own magnificence. Like, truly, that's the medicine. I feel like, how many times are you in deep awe of your magnificence, therefore the magnificence of everything around you and the whole world? We cannot be courageously co-creating unless we actually deeply honor that truth to start with, first and foremost. So I feel like perhaps those two would be my, you're like honing in, like you're calling in more, but I feel that's like,
no, that's great. I think that's a beautiful place to start. And, you know, for people who are not aware of what you're thinking, feeling, emoting, just start with that. It's a simple act of sitting there, and when you look out into the streets, or when you look at your computer when you're doing work, or when you're just taking a walk during your rest break during this lockdown, if you're able to go out for a walk, tune in and notice where the majority of your energy is being allocated. Is it into worry, doubt, fear of the future and the unknown, or are you blessing and showing gratitude to everything that's happening, even the parts of you that are breaking, the heartbreak? And that is very difficult. That's something very difficult to wrap our heads around, you know, and our hearts around. It's like, oh, how do I give blessings and gratitude to that which is breaking within me? And if you need support, then you go out and you reach for that support, because we're tribal creatures. We need the community to witness us in that process. And if we were in a live workshop, that's what we would do. We would all sit and gather together and honor the person who was metaphorically dying in the middle of the circle. It's very indigenous, it's very shamanic, it's very ancient, very old. This is something that we're wired to do for one another. And because we can't do that, that's what we're doing here in these virtual spaces that you see popping up left, right, and center. We're here to hold and support people that need that, you know, if we can't get physical support, hey, we got virtual. So let's be grateful for that. Right?
So grateful, infinitely grateful. And to know that that work, that courage, I pray and I invite whomever is listening to truly receive it as that you're doing it for everyone else equally. That on some level, energetically, that we are all receiving this equally, whilst honoring the individual truth, of course, of that medicine, of that journey as well. So on that note, Diwan, I'm so grateful and so honored. I feel like we will share for lifetimes long, it feels like. So honored.
Sure. Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time this afternoon from up in northern New South Wales to connect from, you know, your land down here to the big city. And I really appreciate you and everything that you're doing in terms of sustainability inside and out. And I look forward to having a conversation with you some other time.
Likewise, it's an honor, Johnson. So much love, D1s.
Yes. Thank you so much for tuning in, everyone. If you want to leave any comments or if any questions for us, or any insights or sharings that have come out from this, feel free and let us know. We're happy to connect.
Indeed. Until next, D1s. Love.